Hey y'all, welcome back to CFB Picks. This week we're going to be breaking down a matchup in the Big 12 between Kansas and TCU, the game day game of the week. Before we dive into this one, we'll be reviewing ultimately the slugfest between PSU and Northwestern next week when I break down the Penn State-Michigan matchup, so be sure to tune into that one. But for now, we're going to zero in on this matchup between Kansas and TCU. Right now, the line is sitting right about -6 in TCU's favor, with the over-under right at about 67.5 points as of Tuesday evening here. So in short, looking at both these teams, they match up pretty similarly. Kansas had a slightly more difficult strength of schedule, but they've both essentially played well against good and against not so good teams in terms of the FCS crossers they had. So without further ado, getting into TCU's stats so far this year. Currently TCU's putting up 48.5 points per game. They're only allowing 22 points per game. And I think that's in part due to their strength of schedule at 90.5. I think the jury is still kind of out on this defense. But on the offensive side, they've been very well balanced with 7 yards per rush and just under 10 yards per pass and a total of 418 yards per game in total of offense. Looking on from there, the defensive stats are 120 yards against per game on the ground and 251 yards against through the air. So maybe a bit of a concern with the pass defense. Going on from there, their efficiency is about a .088. That's about a 100th less than Kansas's. So that's just correlating how many points you're scoring to your total yardage, and that can be influenced by turnovers, kickoff returns, and any other means by which you score points that aren't directly proportional to yards, as I like to put it. Going on from there, getting into Kansas. So Kansas is at 41.6 points per game, 25.6 points allowed per game. Their strength of schedule, or the average rank of their opponent, if you will. This includes the FCS opponents, using an estimate for that strength is about 74. So the average rank of each opponent they play is 74th in the nation. Their yards per rush is at 6.2, and the yards per pass is at 9.24, and the total yards against per game is 470.4. So offensively, both of these teams seem to match up pretty well, especially given relatively similar strengths of schedule to date. One thing that is notable, TCU already appears on paper to have the better defense. It's also worth noting, as I discussed before, so the pass yards against per game, Kansas is at 269, TCU is at 248.25, and I think these two statistics are pretty important, more so the 269 pass yards against for Kansas, because if TCU is going to win this game, I think they're really going to leverage throwing the ball through the air. Another noteworthy point is that with only 4 and 5 data points or games worth of data, if you will, Kansas only allowed 92 yards through the air against their FCS opponent, and TCU allowed over 200. So what you got in these two FCS games, while it may not be critical data for this game, it does influence their past defensive statistics, and I think in a way inflates Kansas's, that 269. So I think there's a pretty good argument that TCU's pass defense is a good bit better than Kansas's. And I think that when we get into the model, this is kind of a breaking point, if you will, in the statistics that's going to tilt one way or another. So getting into the model, right now our projected yards of offense for Kansas is 5.1. That's average per each play, regardless of the run or pass. and TCU is at 7.1. The model currently has this game at 27.6 points for Kansas and 35.3 for TCU. My pick for the game is going to be 28-35. In this case, usually I vary a good bit from my models, but I think in this case the model is spot on. Even though TCU, has had a weaker schedule, their offensive pass efficiency has really, really just stood out throughout the year. Even against Oklahoma, who, good team, not so good team. I think 370 yards passing on the day is something notable. Maybe there's a little bit of, kind of OU spiraling in that, but I think that's a notable statistic. Saying that, if they can put up 370 yards through the air against Oklahoma, they should at least be capable of getting a number near that. Against Kansas, I don't think it'll be quite as high. Going on from there, I also think what else kind of tips this game in TCU's favor is I think Kansas played really well against their FCS opponent, which I alluded to before, is kind of inflating their defensive statistics a bit, especially with the pass. 92 yards per game, that doesn't happen very often. And, maybe this Kansas pass defense is really good. I think we just haven't seen enough games to know for certain. Meanwhile, TCU, I see the 220 yards against through the air as kind of a bad game on defense. It might come to fruition by the end of the year that this TCU pass defense is pretty bad. And maybe that was, an accurate representation. But for now, I'm willing to kind of let that slide. I don't think you go undefeated at this point if your pass defense is terrible. So additionally, I've talked a lot about the pass defense, but getting into the run defense, neither of these teams are really projected to run the ball very well. TCU's at 3.2 and Kansas at 2.7. So I really think this game is going to hinge on the pass. So I think in that case, that's really going to favor TCU. Going on from there, I think another reason why the model is picking TCU and why I don't have a problem with that is I think in the last, 5, 6, maybe as many as 10 years, I think what we've seen is that a good pass game really translates. When you look at, teams like Ohio State, I think a big reason they're able to beat teams, apart from, having superior talent, but really beat teams by a lot in a competitive conference week in and week out, is their passing game translates very well. I think the argument has been made, and I agree with it, that I don't think rush games, translate quite as well. And I think in this case, as the model is suggesting, I think the rushing is going to be kind of a wash in this game. Meanwhile, for the passing, it looks like TCU is going to be probably about 3 yards or more better per pass, which I think is going to give them the advantage to beat Kansas despite having a slightly worse defense. So going on from there, we're going to get into some paths for how I think Kansas can pull out the win at home here. Kind of as I alluded to before, I think the jury is still out on this defense. They might have a really good pass defense, and if that shows up, that's going to give TCU major issues. I really think that whoever throws the ball better in this game is going to win. I think the rush numbers at about 3.2 and 2.7 are what is going to show up. I don't think either of these teams are great at running the ball, and I think that when they go on to face, especially in TCU's case, a much better defense than they faced at least most of the year, probably with the exception of Oklahoma. I think that you're really going to see that start to affect the run games and bring down those averages. Because right now, 7 yards per rush and 6.2 yards per rush, those are good to very good numbers. That means you're moving the ball on the ground. Every other play you're getting a first down. And I don't see that holding up in this game, as the model is suggesting. So I think going on from there, if Kansas can maintain a good pass defense, that's going to give TCU problems. I think likewise as well, if TCU plays a really good pass defense game, that's going to give Kansas serious issues. And there's reason to believe that TCU does have a better pass defense. Right now, the model's saying they're about give or take 20 points better per game. I don't look too deeply into that, but just because of the difference in competition so far. But I do think that the passing game from TCU is the most likely tangible that will translate into this game, apart from any of the other offense or defensive qualities each team displays. Going on from there, I think that if this game is an upset versus a blowout, it's really difficult to say, especially when the game is within one score. I think if a blowout occurs, it's going to be due to TCU's passing efficiency. But with Kansas's defense, if that shows up and plays well, as the statistics suggest, which do include that FCS game, I think, in a one-score game, anything can happen, and that could really give TCU fits and potentially swing the score back Kansas's way. So with that being said, my final pick is 35 TCU, Kansas 28, just 1 point more than the spread. I think the model is spot on here, and I do think that the TCU passing game versus Kansas's defense is going to be the matchup to watch when they during kickoff on Saturday. So with that being said, if you like the video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to this channel. And tune in next week for Penn State versus Michigan. Thanks.